There's a number I'll never forget. 63 missed calls. All from my daughter after she learned I survived a heart attack. Funny how silence disappears when money feels threatened. My name is Leonard Hayes. I'm 71 years old, and for more than 40 years I owned 3 successful car dealerships across Arizona. Most people assumed my daughter Rachel was the center of my world. Truth is, for years, I'd been trying to hold together a relationship that had quietly become transactional. The heart attack happened on a Tuesday morning in my office parking lot. One minute, I was unlocking my car. The next, I woke up in a hospital bed with wires across my chest and a nurse asking, "Who should we call?" I said, "My daughter." Rachel answered on the 4th ring. I told her I was in the hospital. For a moment, there was silence. Then she sighed softly and said, "Dad, Ethan and I leave for Dubai tomorrow." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What did the doctors say?" Dubai. Apparently the reservations were non-refundable. I told her to go. And somehow, the worst part wasn't that she left. It was hearing the relief in her voice after I said she could. That evening, someone else walked into my hospital room. Daniel, my general manager. Not family. Just a man who'd worked beside me for 22 years. He handed me a coffee made exactly the way I drink it. No questions asked. Then he pulled up a chair and said, "What needs handling?" That was it. No dramatic speech. No performance. Just presence. And sitting there in that hospital bed, I realized something painful. The man with no obligation to stay, stayed. The person I'd spent years helping couldn't interrupt 4 days. At 2 a.m., unable to sleep, I opened my banking app. For 11 years, I'd been sending Rachel $7,000 every month. Mortgage payments, credit card bailouts, temporary emergencies, more than $900,000 in total. And for the first time, I admitted something to myself. I wasn't supporting my daughter anymore. I was financing access to her attention. The next morning, I canceled every transfer. By lunchtime, I had 63 missed calls. Around 3 in the afternoon, my phone finally stopped buzzing. The silence felt strange, not peaceful, just unfamiliar. A nurse named Carla came in to check my blood pressure. She noticed the phone face down beside me and asked if I wanted her to move it. I told her no. Truth was, I kept staring at it, waiting. Not for Rachel to apologize, just for one message that sounded like concern instead of panic. It never came. Every voicemail sounded rushed. "Dad, call me back." "Dad, what's going on?" "Dad, why is the transfer declined?" Not one asked how my chest felt. Not one asked whether I'd slept. By evening, the doctors had me walking slow laps around the cardiac floor. Hospitals teach you humility quickly. One day you're signing payroll checks and negotiating 6-figure inventory deals. The next day, you feel victorious because you made it 15 feet without needing to sit down. Daniel walked beside me the whole time, never hovering, never making me feel weak, just matching my pace. At one point, he said quietly, "You scared everybody at the dealership." I laughed a little. Rachel didn't sound scared. He didn't answer. Good men know when silence is kinder than agreement. The next morning, Daniel arrived before sunrise carrying a folder full of paperwork from the dealerships, vendor contracts, staff schedules, insurance renewals, things I normally handled myself. He sat beside the window while I reviewed everything with shaky hands. Then he said something I still think about. "You built all this yourself. Maybe it's time somebody helped carry it." Simple sentence. But when you've spent your whole life being needed, hearing someone offer to carry part of the weight does something to you, especially when it comes from someone who expects nothing back. That afternoon, Rachel finally called again. This time I answered. The first thing I heard was airport noise. Voices. Rolling luggage. Then her voice. "Dad, why did the bank reject the transfer?" Not hello, not how are you feeling. Straight to the money. I closed my eyes. Some disappointments stop hurting once they become predictable. I told her we'd talk when she got back. Her tone changed immediately, sharper, defensive. "Dad, Ethan already booked everything." I almost laughed, as if that explained anything, as if vacations somehow outranked heart monitors. I told her again that we'd talk later, then I hung up, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty afterward. That scared me more than the heart attack, because guilt had been controlling me for so long that living without it felt unnatural. That night, lying awake under the dim hospital lights, I started replaying memories I'd spent years avoiding. Rachel at 16 crying because I missed her dance recital while closing a dealership deal. Rachel at 21 asking me why work always came first. Rachel at 30 slowly learning that every emotional distance between us could be patched over with money. And me letting it happen because writing checks was easier than having honest conversations. Parents don't always ruin relationships through cruelty. Sometimes they ruin them through convenience. And somewhere along the way, I stopped being her father. I became her safety net, her emergency account, her solution, maybe even her habit. And habits are hard to love, especially when they suddenly disappear. The strange thing was, part of me still wanted Rachel to walk through the hospital doors and prove me wrong. That's the curse of being a parent. Even after disappointment becomes predictable, hope keeps showing up anyway. Around midnight, I heard thunder outside the hospital windows. Phoenix rain always sounds strange, like the sky is apologizing for disappearing most of the year. I sat there listening to it while the heart monitor blinked steadily beside me. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about business, not inventory, not quarterly numbers, not expansion deals, just people, who had shown up and who hadn't. The next morning, Carla helped me shower for the first time after surgery. Nothing strips pride away faster than needing help standing upright. I remember gripping the rail beside the wall while she adjusted the water temperature. "Easy," she said quietly. Funny word. There's nothing easy about realizing your body has suddenly become something fragile. When I finally sat back down on the edge of the bed, exhausted from doing something I once never even thought about, Carla handed me a towel and said, "You know who visits patients the most?" I asked who. Usually not the people they expect. Then she walked out before I could answer. I thought about that sentence for hours, because she was right. Life trains us to believe loyalty belongs to family titles, but hospitals tell a different story. Hospitals reveal patterns. Who stays overnight? Who calls repeatedly? Who notices medications? Who learns the nurses' names? And who disappears the second life becomes inconvenient? By Saturday evening, Daniel had practically become part of the cardiac floor. The nurses greeted him by name. One of them joked that he should start paying rent. He laughed politely, then immediately asked whether my blood pressure readings had improved. Always focused, always paying attention. Rachel sent one text that night. "Please don't make this harder than it needs to be." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I finally understood something that should have been obvious years earlier. People who benefit from your silence usually get uncomfortable the moment you start setting boundaries. And maybe that's why my chest hurt in ways the doctors couldn't measure. Not because I was losing my daughter, because I was finally seeing the relationship honestly. And honesty has a way of grieving the fantasy before it accepts the truth. Part 2. 3 days after the heart attack, the doctors finally removed most of the monitors from my chest. Funny thing about recovery, people think the hardest part is surviving. It isn't. The hardest part is lying still long enough for your mind to catch up with the truth. By Friday morning, Rachel had called 2 more times, still in Dubai, still angry, still pretending the issue was communication instead of priorities. Daniel never mentioned any of it. He just kept showing up. Morning coffee, paperwork, updates from the dealerships, the kind of consistency that becomes emotional before you realize it. Late that afternoon, a younger doctor stopped by my room to review discharge plans. She asked whether somebody would be staying with me once I got home. Before I could answer, Daniel said, I'll handle it. No hesitation. No discussion. Just certainty. The doctor nodded like that, settled everything. And strangely enough, it did. That night I couldn't sleep again. Hospitals become very honest after midnight. The hallways quiet down. Machines beep softer, and your thoughts stop giving you places to hide. Around 1:30 a.m., I opened my email and found old photos Rachel had sent me years ago. Birthday dinners, family vacations, Christmas mornings. I kept staring at one picture from 12 years earlier, Rachel smiling beside me at the original dealership, her arm around my shoulder, both of us laughing, back when conversations still happened naturally, before every interaction somehow became connected to money. And the painful thing was this: I couldn't fully blame her, because every time life got uncomfortable, I solved it financially. Argument? Buy something. Distance? Send money. Guilt? Write another check. I trained my own daughter to associate love with financial rescue, then acted surprised when she stopped separating the two. The realization sat heavy in my chest, heavier than the surgery pain. The next morning, Daniel drove me home. The house felt colder than I remembered. Big homes get very quiet when there's nobody left inside them except memories. Daniel carried in my medication, adjusted the recliner near the living room window, then started cleaning the kitchen without being asked. I watched him for a long moment. "Your wife's going to get tired of you spending every day here," I told him. He smiled a little. "She's the one making the casseroles." That hit me harder than it should have, because kindness always feels louder when you're emotionally starving. Later that evening, Rachel finally video called me. She looked irritated before the screen even stabilized. Perfect hotel lighting, ocean behind her, expensive dinner somewhere nearby, and there I was in a recliner with hospital socks and a plastic pill organizer. "Dad, this is getting ridiculous." Ridiculous. Interesting word choice. I asked her what exactly was ridiculous. She started listing bills, mortgage, school tuition, car payments, investment deadlines. Every sentence sounded less like concern and more like accounting. Finally, I asked quietly, "Rachel, did you ever plan on coming home?" She stopped talking. Then came the sigh again. The same sigh from the hospital. "Dad, you said you were stable." Stable. As though surviving automatically meant not needing anybody. I looked out the living room window while she talked. Daniel was outside helping my neighbor carry groceries up her driveway, not because anyone asked him, just because he noticed she was struggling. And suddenly something became painfully obvious. Character is rarely revealed during big moments. It reveals itself in ordinary ones. Who stays? Who notices? Who quietly helps when there's nothing to gain from it? That night, after Rachel hung up angry again, I called my attorney. Harold Finch, 76 years old, sharp enough to make most people nervous within 30 seconds. He agreed to stop by Monday morning. I didn't tell him why. Men like Harold usually already know. Sunday afternoon, Daniel brought over folders from the dealerships again. We sat at my dining room table reviewing numbers while rain tapped softly against the windows. At one point he looked up and said, "You know the staff's scared, right?" "Scared of what?" "You not coming back?" I leaned back slowly. "Funny thing about building a business. You think you're creating income. Then one day you realize you accidentally created responsibility. Entire families depended on those dealerships. Salesmen, mechanics, receptionists, managers. People who trusted me with their livelihoods for decades. And suddenly I found myself thinking about the future differently. Not emotionally, practically. Who could actually protect what I built? Who understood sacrifice? Who understood loyalty? Deep down, I already knew the answer. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud yet. That evening, Daniel helped me organize old paperwork from a cabinet near the living room. Inside were decades of photographs, grand openings, company barbecues, holiday parties. Rachel as a little girl sitting inside my office pretending to answer phones. I picked up one photo from 25 years earlier. She couldn't have been older than 10. Big smile, missing front tooth, holding a paper sign that said, "Best Dad Ever." I stared at it quietly. Daniel noticed. "She adored you," he said. I nodded slowly. That's what makes this harder, because underneath all the resentment and financial dependence and disappointment, there had once been something real, something simple. And maybe that's why parents tolerate unhealthy relationships longer than they should. We keep loving the memory of who someone used to be. Monday night, after Harold confirmed the paperwork changes were already underway, I sat alone in the kitchen with the lights off. The house felt different. Not lighter exactly, just more honest. I poured myself a glass of water and looked out toward the backyard. For years, I'd convinced myself that providing financially was the same thing as being emotionally present. Work became my excuse for everything. Long hours, missed birthdays, canceled dinners, and every time guilt appeared, I compensated with money. Eventually, Rachel stopped asking for time, because money was easier to receive. That realization hurt, not in a dramatic way, quietly, like discovering damage inside walls you thought were solid. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise and walked slowly onto the back patio. The air smelled like rain and desert dust. For the first time since the heart attack, I felt genuinely old. Not weak, just aware that time had become something measurable, limited, and suddenly the idea of leaving everything I built to someone who only appeared when financially necessary felt unbearable. Not because Rachel was evil. She wasn't. She was simply used to a version of love I helped create, and now both of us were finally being forced to confront it. Part 3. Harold arrived Monday morning at exactly 9 o'clock. Gray suit, leather briefcase. Expression permanently set somewhere between professional concern and mild disappointment. He sat across from me in the dining room while Daniel quietly made coffee in the kitchen. Harold noticed him immediately. Sharp people always notice the person doing the actual work. After a few minutes of small talk, Harold folded his hands and asked, "What are we changing?" Straight to it. No unnecessary theater. I respected that. I told him the will needed to be rewritten. Completely. Not adjusted. Not updated. Rewritten. For a moment, Harold just studied me. Then he asked the most important question anybody had asked since the heart attack. "Are you making this decision emotionally?" I thought about Rachel, about the missed calls, about Dubai, about Daniel quietly fixing problems around my house while expecting absolutely nothing. Then I answered honestly, "No. I think I'm finally making it clearly." Harold nodded once. That was enough. We spent the next 2 hours reviewing everything. The dealerships, the commercial properties, the investments, the lake house, every account I'd spent 40 years building. By the end of the meeting, the structure looked very different. Rachel would still receive enough money to live comfortably. Her children's education would be fully covered. The lake house would remain in her name. But the dealerships, those went to Daniel. Controlling ownership, operational authority, everything. Not because he asked, not because he expected it, because he earned it. When Harold finally left, the house felt unusually quiet. Daniel stood near the kitchen counter holding his coffee. I realized he'd probably heard enough to understand what happened. He looked uncomfortable, almost uneasy. "Leonard," he started. I raised my hand gently. "Don't argue with me unless you plan on doing a worse job than I did." That made him laugh, briefly. Then his expression turned serious again. "You don't owe me this." Maybe not. But life has a strange way of revealing who's already carrying your burdens long before titles catch up. I looked at him carefully. "Do you know why I trust you?" He shook his head. "Because every difficult year this company ever had, you acted like it belonged to you already." That hit him hard. I could see it. Good men struggle to accept recognition, especially the ones who actually deserve it. Tuesday morning, Rachel finally came home. I knew before she arrived because the front security camera alerted my phone. Black SUV, Fast parking. Aggressive walk to the front door. People tell you everything before they speak. She stepped inside carrying anger like armor, and underneath it, fear. Real fear. The kind people feel when they realize stability might disappear. Dad, what is going on? No hug, no pause, straight to confrontation. Daniel quietly stood up from the dining table. I'll give you 2 space, he said. Rachel watched him walk toward the hallway. Then she looked back at me. Why is he here? Interesting question. Not, how are you feeling? Not, are you recovering okay? Just suspicion. I told her to sit down. She didn't. Instead, she crossed her arms and started talking faster. Bills. Transfers. Embarrassment. How difficult I'd made things. I listened quietly. And the strange part was this. For the first time in years, her disappointment no longer controlled me. Because once you finally see a relationship clearly, emotional manipulation loses most of its power. Eventually, she stopped talking, probably because she realized I wasn't interrupting. That's when I asked her the question. If I lost everything tomorrow, would you still want me in your life? Silence. Real silence. Not confusion, not shock, calculation. And that silence broke something inside me permanently, not dramatically, quietly, like a rope finally snapping after years under tension. Rachel looked away first. Then she said softly, that's not fair. Maybe it wasn't, but it was honest. And honesty tends to feel cruel when people have spent years avoiding it. I told her about the will, about Daniel, about the dealerships. At first she thought I was bluffing. Then she realized I wasn't. The anger disappeared almost instantly, and what replaced it looked smaller, younger, almost hurt. After everything, you're choosing him over me? I shook my head slowly. No, Rachel, I'm choosing the person who stayed. That sentence ended the argument. Not because she agreed, because she knew I meant it. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Daniel remained in the hallway, clearly uncomfortable being part of something so personal. Rachel wiped beneath her eyes quickly, almost annoyed at herself for crying. Then she asked quietly, did you ever think maybe I got used to the money because you never gave me anything else? That one landed. Hard. Because there was truth inside it. I thought back to all the years I spent building the dealerships. Early mornings, late nights, constant travel, always chasing the next expansion, the next deal, the next milestone. Meanwhile, Rachel grew up learning that my absence usually arrived with expensive apologies, new phones, shopping trips, tuition checks, cars. I'd spent years convincing myself I was being generous, but maybe generosity without presence eventually becomes emotional outsourcing. I sat there quietly for a long moment. Then I nodded. You're right about part of that. Rachel looked surprised. Most people enter arguments expecting defense, not honesty. I should have taught you boundaries a long time ago, I continued. Instead, I taught you that love meant rescue. Tears rolled down her face then, not dramatic tears, just exhausted ones. The kind people cry when they finally stop protecting themselves from the truth. Daniel slowly stepped into the dining room and placed a glass of water beside her without saying anything. That small gesture somehow broke the tension more than any speech could have. Rachel looked at him carefully. Then she whispered, you really did stay. Daniel shrugged lightly. He needed somebody. Simple. No bitterness, no pride, just fact. And I think that's when Rachel finally understood what separated the two relationships. One had been built around obligation, the other around loyalty. Those things sound similar when life is easy. They are not the same once life gets difficult, because deep down, she already knew it was true. Part 4. Rachel sat down slowly after that. For the first time since walking into the house, she stopped sounding angry. Now she just sounded tired. And honestly, that hurt more. People imagine family breakdowns as screaming matches. Most of the time they're quieter than that. Just years of small disappointments finally running out of places to hide. The room stayed silent for a while. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Somewhere in the kitchen, the coffee maker clicked off. Then Rachel asked something I wasn't expecting. When did you stop believing in me? That question landed hard, because the truthful answer was complicated. I never stopped loving my daughter, not once. But somewhere along the way, I stopped trusting her character. And those are not the same thing. I leaned back carefully in the recliner, my chest still aching from surgery. Rachel, this was never about one vacation. She looked down. I continued. It's about years of only hearing from you when something was wrong. No denial. That told me enough. I explained things calmly. The money, the constant emergencies, the way every conversation somehow circled back to financial problems. And finally, the part I regretted most. I helped create this. Her eyes lifted toward mine. I told her the truth I'd avoided for years. Every time guilt appeared between us, I covered it with money. Every uncomfortable conversation became a transfer. Every emotional distance became another rescue. I taught her that access to me came through financial dependence, and children eventually learn the version of love you repeatedly demonstrate. Tears formed in her eyes then. Real ones. Not dramatic. Not manipulative. Just quiet. I didn't realize it got this bad, she whispered. Neither had I. That was the tragedy of it. Relationships rarely collapse all at once. They erode slowly. One ignored phone call. One avoided conversation. One financial shortcut at a time. Daniel quietly walked back into the room carrying fresh coffee. He stopped when he noticed Rachel crying. Immediately he turned around to leave again. That's who he was. Never intrusive, never trying to position himself inside somebody else's emotional moment. But Rachel surprised me. Daniel, wait. He paused. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. You really stayed the whole time? He shrugged slightly. He needed somebody around. Simple answer. No attempt to look noble. No performance. And somehow that made it hit even harder. Rachel stared down at her hands. Then finally asked the question sitting underneath everything else. Did you ever resent me? Daniel answered immediately. No. And I believed him. Because resentment usually belongs to people keeping score. Daniel never did. That evening turned into the first honest family conversation we'd had in years. Not perfect. Not magically repaired. Just honest. Which mattered more. Rachel admitted she'd started depending on the money so heavily that losing it terrified her. I admitted I'd used financial support to avoid difficult emotional truths. Neither of us left that conversation looking innocent, and maybe that's why it finally mattered. Before Rachel left that night, she stood near the front door for a long moment. Then she quietly asked, "Do you think we can fix this?" I looked at my daughter carefully. Really looked at her. Not the bills. Not the disappointments. Just her. And for the first time in years, she looked less like somebody demanding something and more like somebody afraid of losing something real. So I told her the truth. I think we can start being honest. That was enough. Recovery took months. Cardiac therapy, medication, slow mornings, long walks, lifestyle changes. But the harder recovery happened inside the family. Rachel started calling without asking for anything. At first, the conversations felt awkward, then gradually normal. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive dramatically. Sometimes it just sounds like a daughter calling to ask how your day was. Daniel officially became CEO 6 months later. Best decision I ever made. The staff trusted him. The business grew. And watching him lead something he helped build for decades felt right in a way I can't fully explain. A year after the heart attack, all three of us had dinner together at my house. No lawyers, no arguments, no financial discussions, just dinner. At one point, Rachel looked across the table at Daniel and smiled. You know, she said quietly, Dad trusts you more than anybody. Daniel shook his head. No, he trusts people who stay. That sentence stayed with me. Because in the end, that's really what this whole story was about. Not money, not inheritance, not punishment. Presence. The people who quietly remain beside you when life becomes inconvenient. Those people are rare, and if you're lucky enough to find them, you protect them. Because sometimes the people who deserve your legacy aren't the ones who share your blood. They're the ones who never made you earn their loyalty in the first place. A few weeks after that dinner, Rachel called me one Sunday morning. No emergency, no financial problem, no hidden reason. She simply asked whether I wanted breakfast. I almost said no out of habit. Then I realized something. Healing often begins in very ordinary moments. So I said yes. We ate at a small diner near Camelback Road. Nothing fancy. Just coffee, eggs, and two people trying to learn each other again without money sitting at the center of the table. The conversation was awkward at first, careful, like both of us were afraid of touching old bruises. But eventually she started talking about the kids, about Ethan, about how overwhelmed she'd been for years pretending everything in her life was stable. Then she admitted something quietly while stirring her coffee. When the transfer stopped, I realized I didn't actually know how to stand on my own anymore. That honesty mattered, because accountability is usually the first real step toward change. I told her something then that I wish I'd understood decades earlier. Helping somebody is not always the same as loving them well. Sometimes helping becomes protecting people from consequences they desperately need to face. Rachel nodded slowly. No argument, no defensiveness, just understanding. When breakfast ended, she hugged me before walking to her car, and it felt different. Not performative, not guilty, real, small, but real. That afternoon, I sat alone on my back patio, watching the Arizona sunset turn the sky orange and gold. I thought about hospitals, heart attacks, missed calls, and the strange ways life forces people to confront what actually matters. For years, I believed legacy meant money, businesses, property, assets. Now I think legacy is much simpler than that. It's who answers when life becomes inconvenient, who stays in hard rooms, who chooses people over comfort, and whether you had the courage to recognize those people before time ran out. I almost didn't. That's what scared me most. Not the heart attack, not the surgery, the possibility that I could have spent the rest of my life rewarding the wrong kind of loyalty. Thankfully, life gave me one more chance to see clearly, and this time I finally did.